If only I had a time machine and I could time travel back to the past and tell myself to go get those tickets while they were still available for cheap prices. But in order to do that, I would need a DeLorean. And what I'm talking about is we watched Back to the Future Part 2. So I watched I've seen the original BTTF, and I always thought that was a good movie. I watched it when I was a kid. I haven't seen it in years, but I remember it being a great movie. And classic, probably maybe the most influential modern time travel story. But I've never seen any of the sequels. Kat loves the sequels. She loves Part 3 the most because it's a cowboy story, yeehaw. And she wanted to just watch them with me. So while she was over, we watched Back to the Future Part 2. I had always heard that this one was really popular. It's one of those rare movie sequels that a lot of that is very well received. And I knew the premise that they were like going into the future. And I obviously remember the cliffhanger ending of the first film. But I've never actually seen it before. So now having seen it, yeah, Back to the Future Part 2 is a great movie. That is a really, really good movie. There is a tendency, especially I feel like with up until the last maybe 10 years, I want to say that there was kind of a curse with sequels, with big movie sequels, which was the stereotype of it's just the same thing again. It's just a rehash of the original film, because they're not sure really like where to take the concept. So they basically just remix the original concept and don't do too much with it. But Back to the Future 2 doesn't do that. It is a different. It's obviously still a time travel story, and it uses the same concepts, like the same rules that were set up in the first film with like changing the future and stuff like that. But you're seeing it in a totally different way, and you're jumping between lots of different time periods, which is cool. It feels like an expansion on the first movie, which is nice. The first one is pretty much all in that one time period location of like Marty McFly going back to the 50s, right? Like when his parents were in high school. It's mostly, it's pretty much locked into there. But here you get lots of different time periods. You get to see alternate versions of the timeline with different characters. You see how one thing changes like another thing, and it causes like a whole domino effect to occur. And, but it never feels overly complicated. It all makes sense. The other thing is like, so here's the thing that I thought was funny is it's one of those films that you watch and there's certain cliches in it. Like at one point, Marty literally says, in English, please. Like he literally says that. And that would be like a groaner today, or you couldn't say that line unironically today because it's such a cliche now. It's kind of it's seen as like a little bit lame. But back then, I mean, it's the same feeling that I feel like if you go and watch Bleach, something like Bleach in the modern era, where like straight up there are so many like anime tropes. Like when you think of like shonen anime tropes, like Bleach is literally the fucking like nothing personal, it teleports behind you, nothing personal kid anime. Like that is where that visual comes from, at least in the modern day. Some anime nerd is gonna be like, actually it comes from Toki Joseki Pinko the 1985 OVA were about a schoolgirl ninja who like teleports and she's like a cyborg. And you watch Bleach today and you're like, oh wow, this feels very tropey. But back in like 2003, these are like where the tropes come from. Like this is, a lot of this stuff is new and very novel. So, you put it in that context And it kind of it smooths it over, because I think in that same scene where he's English, English doc, please. That's when he's explaining changing the timeline, and I was thinking like, yeah, this is probably like, there weren't that many mainstream time travel stories back then. And like when that movie came out in like 1980, it wasn't 85, it was like 87 or something, 88. The original movie was 85, I believe. There weren't that many time travel stories. It was pretty much like Jules Verne, like The Time Machine, like old stuff. Which people might have read in like, their classic literature class or something like that. And then there was, beyond that, it was like, pulp sci-fi stuff, pulp sci-fi magazines or novels and things in that area where it's a lot more niche. And a lot of people probably wouldn't be familiar with a lot of time travel stories or common tropes of time travel or common kind of mechanics of those kinds of stories, with stuff like the butterfly effect and changing the future, or the grandfather paradox and stuff like that. I mean, the first movie is like based around the grandfather paradox. So in this movie, there's a scene where Doc Brown has to explain like, oh, well, you changed something got changed in the past. So now we're in an alternate timeline, and the timeline split. And, having a scene like that in a movie at the time was probably pretty important, because I'd imagine a lot of audiences weren't familiar with, like, they wouldn't immediately get what was going on. Compare that to like, I don't know, like a modern time travel story, and something like that would just happen, and they usually wouldn't feel the need to explain it. They just be like, oh my god, the future is different, I have to change it. But back then there had to be like a scene to go into a little more detail to let people know what was going on. No, this movie's just really fun. It's just, well, not always fun. Some scenes are a little dark, but just consistently really entertaining. I was constantly I just wanted to see what was going to happen next, and I was enjoying what was happening at the moment. Like, that whole sequence, oh god, it's great when they go into the future, into 2015. And I remember being in like middle school in 2015, and seeing like all of these, like, oh, this is the year, in Back to the Future where this is supposed to happen. And oh god, I love all the future stuff. I found that stuff really charming. I think there was maybe a danger of it not aging very well, because part of the culture shock, I guess, the time shock, is that Marty is like walking around in 2015. And I thought it's actually really funny, because from 85 to 2015, that's like, excuse me, that's like 30-ish years, right? Oh, fuck, hang on. 8, 9, 10, it's like 40 years. Bear with me. Don't laugh. Don't laugh at my math skills. It's like 40 years, right? I'm pretty sure. Oh, fuck. We're gonna roll with it, and that was a time of like 80s nostalgia never died, which I think that's funny. But he's there, and part of it is he's seeing the culture of his day, which is when the movie came out, and it's in like an antique shop. I thought that was really funny. Like, it's like a whole antique shop for 1980s merchandise and stuff that at the time was new. And I feel like, I don't know, there could have been a danger of that not aging very well. Like, oh, it's kind of, oh, haha, yeah, that's old now. But no, it's actually, I think it's, especially just having the context in mind of when it came out, I think that stuff's really funny. I don't know, I love that whole sequence of him going into the future and seeing all the things that are different. A lot of the ideas are just very fun, like great visuals, the hoverboard. I love the 1980s themed cafe, where I thought this was kind of cute. They have like these AI robot waiters that are the idea is like you could get your, but they're like, it's almost like deep fakes. The idea is like, oh, it's like a screen with a face on it, and you can order a burger from a weird looking Michael Jackson, who it's still like black Michael Jackson, which is funny. But like the background, like it looks like Max Headroom, which I thought was very funny because that would have been the frame of reference for like an AI generated robot, like I don't know, like computer character, you know, a prehistoric VTuber, you might call it. So that's funny. The guy who plays Biff's grandson, I think, yeah, grandson, is just great. He's just like a fucking lunatic. He's like Yamazaki from KOF. He's just, hey dude, I'm gonna fucking kill you. He's crazy. He's really those guys, they're so hammy, but it's so much fun. And the great part is that Marty is just like he's trying to hold back his culture shock, and that he's freaked out by what's going on, and he's trying to play it cool and roll with it. And that contrast is really funny to me. Yeah, I don't know. I love the idea of like getting the sports. The big conflict is that they get the sports almanac, which tells them the results of every sporting game for the last 50 years. And then old Biff goes back in time. He steals the DeLorean to give it to his younger self, and that ends up fucking up the whole thing because this Biff, who's like a fucking maniac, who's like an actual murderous psychopath who should be institutionalized, ends up becoming a billionaire, and he's basically Donald Trump. And that is great. It's such an engaging conflict. This whole thing of like, I am on the edge of my seat as Marty is trying to steal this fucking, going back to the past again to steal this sports almanac. And it turns into like this, it's so much fun. It is such a fun, creative, cool movie. And I think it holds up really well, I think. I haven't seen it. I don't have any nostalgia for it, and I can say it holds up really well. It's a really good time, and it's totally worth a rewatch. And yeah, it makes me want to watch the third one. The only reason we didn't is because we didn't have time. So that was cool. Totally give a thumbs up to that. A couple things.